America's acceptance of psychiatry, the study of mental illness, is very recent, dating from the establishment of the Menninger Clinic in Topeka, Kansas in 1919. And Dr. Karl Menninger, through the revolutionary concepts stated in his books, like The Human Mind and Man Against Himself, become an international symbol of hope for the mentally ill. Today, in the library of the Menninger Foundation, Dr. Menninger talks with his friend Denver Linley, editor of Viking Press.
Must be enormously exciting to see hidden potentials develop or hindered potentials expand.
It is. It is. The notion, you see, that people can get in medicine, if you have an illness, let us say a sore throat, something else, and you go to a physician, or even if you don't, his hope or yours is that you'll get back where you were before that developed. Get back to where you were. Now, this kind of a goal is not quite the same, psychiatry. That is, we keep hoping that the man will get weller than well. He won't just get well, he won't get back to where he was, he'll be better. And many are. Abraham Lincoln was a much better man after his mental illness than before. All the great things he did were after his illness. And he undoubtedly evolved through it and learned through it and then progressed as a result of it. Now that frequently happens. And in psychiatry, there's quite a sharp difference from the attitude of the attitude of the physician or the function of the physician. In ordinary medicine, a doctor has to learn not to identify himself with his patient's suffering. If the doctor is as uncomfortable as the patient, that makes it pretty bad. The surgeon can't be thinking how much his procedures hurt. The psychiatrist has to constantly be aware of how his patient feels. Try to imagine, how would it feel to be there? How would it feel to have this happen to me?
From what you say about the training of young psychiatrists, I judge a good deal of it is learning to display mercy, or am I putting that wrong?
Well, yes, but it's beyond that. No, I would say the element of mercy is there, but that's in all positions. But I think in psychiatry, it goes beyond that, because I think the psychiatrist's constant inspiration or constant goal is the fact that these individuals who are misjudged and often disliked or feared by other people often have such great capabilities, so that I would say that maybe you could say a psychiatrist is somebody who is constantly aware that the stone rejected by the builders may become the head of the corner.
I think the public are very well aware of the wonders that are being done in making people healthier, curing them, if the word is permissible.
I don't know that you're right. I hope you are, but I'm afraid the public doesn't yet realize either how much it can help or what a very good prognosis, what a very good outlook there is for the recovery from mental illness. I think this is an amazing fact. It's come so gradually that people scarcely realize the change, but today there should be very little, I think, of course, there should be no stigma to having had a mental illness. But the stigma arose partly through superstition and partly through a feeling that this meant that a person was gone, no good, forever, ruined, hopeless, and so on. Now that we know that most mentally ill, 90-odd% of the mentally ill are not hopeless, they're not only hopeless, but they are going to be back on the job and better than before in many instances. This is a new notion completely. This would have been unthinkable 40 years ago.
As little time ago as that?
I think so.
Well, is there some point of view, some simple unitary point of view that from which all forms of mental illness could be seen?
Well, question. I think there is, but then...
Would you tell me about it?
Oh, I have told you about it, but I'll tell you again. I can't convert you, I guess. I simply think that while it's important to distinguish the different manifestations, of personality disturbances, personality disorganizations, behavior disturbances. Let's for the moment not even call them mental illnesses. But let's say all kinds of misbehavior. I think it's more important to distinguish rather the trend that the change in the form is taking. In simple language, is the patient getting better? Or is he getting worse? Is this illness that he has cyclic and tends to return, to go and come, or does it tend to slowly go and stay? And what can we do to expedite the latter course? You stop and think of any particular difficulty that you're familiar with. Let's say smoking too much. Now.
Very aptly put.
All right. Now, are you smoking less or more than you used to, let us say? Let's assume, just for the sake of this argument, that this is a symptom of something. Now, then let's say that I would ask you now, not so much, is this smoking a symptom of anorexia nervosa or a symptom of hypomania or something? I'd say rather, are you smoking more or less? Are you keeping an even level and so forth? And that'd be the first question to answer. And the second question is how, assuming this is something you want to get rid of, how can I assist in changing that pattern? What can I substitute for it? How disorganizing is this in your life? What is the reason for it? And so forth and so on. Now, you substitute for the smoking in this discussion something like depressions or severe headaches or, let's say, crying spells, and you'll see what I mean.
Aren't almost all these disorders accompanied by psychic pain of one sort or another?
Yes, more people have experienced it since physical illness is diminishing amount. The mental distress is something more people are aware of. But I think that the distress people suffer, we think of that as an asset. That's on our side. That's on the side of helping to make a change. What's more disturbing, I think what we look at more, what we think of as more ominous, is the degree of self-destructiveness.
Some of the things you discussed in Man Against Himself.
Yes, of course, Freud had suggested that there was a strong, that this tendency to self-injury was instinctual in us, and that this drive to hurt ourselves was one that we corrected in the course of life, and that some people seem to resume it because there are so many ways in which they do become self-destructive, and as you know, and you can look at a good many mental illnesses as being different kinds of self-destruction. I think that our theory about cures, that's the one I developed in another book that you know about, Love Against Hate. That is, I think that we have to find ways in which to counteract the amount of frustration and anger and resentment and vengefulness and so forth that is connected with this self-destructiveness.
Do you look upon these destructive impulses as a kind of energy that has to be turned into useful channels?
Yes, that's pretty well put. That's a model, that's a way of speaking of it. It may not be energy in the sense of electricity that lights these lights, but it's energy of some kind.
In any case, something that can't be overlooked.
Yes, and which can be directed. I think that's the important part. It can be directed constructively or destructively.
Can it be annulled? Can it be wiped out?
I don't think so. But repressed, yes.
And if it is repressed, what happens then?
Well, if it's repressed, then it isn't apparent, but it can be, if the destructive tendencies are repressed without disorganization in the personality being occurring, then you have a relatively comfortable and productive individual.
Is it oversimplifying it to think of the individual himself as in a kind of dynamic equilibrium in which the constructive and destructive energies are sufficiently in balance?
Exactly. You can word it that way, yes. You see, I see these forces, destructive and constructive forces, as you describe them. This was Freud's idea. This was not original with me. But I see this, we see this, as a kind of opposition of hate and love impulses. The emotions that go with destructiveness and constructiveness are, respectively, hate and love. And in a sense, this, what we aspire for, what we aspire to, is the victory of the constructive, loving impulses over the hating impulses. And but actually, of course, one doesn't just decide to hate somebody. This is stimulated by certain things. And similarly, certain things stimulate and encourage love. And this, in a sense, is the background, the philosophy background of all psychiatric treatment.
Well, then, psychiatry can be preventive not only of mental illness, but of crime.
Oh, I think we could, and I think actually in many places psychiatric principles are now being used to treat criminals instead of the old idea was simply, well, lock them up and punish them for 4 months or 4 years or 40 years. Well, that time they'll learn they mustn't rob banks. Because this is incredible nonsense. Nobody learns that you mustn't rob banks by being pinned up. In the meanwhile, it's costing us a lot of money to lock him up. That same individual, you know, could be taught to some very useful things, some very valuable things, and the impulses that lead to this criminal career possibly removed. If they can't, then we have a reason for locking up not 40 years, but 80 years if necessary. Now, the vast majority of physical and mental illness, the vast majority of sickness is not any infection, not any involvement by a foreign body which disturbs you. The vast majority of illness is an internal disorganization which doesn't require an invading organism to bring it about. That's another thing, that's another development in medicine that we owe entirely to Freudianism, to Freudian discoveries. The idea that there could be motives back of illness was not original with Freud, but actually that was a French idea. But a way to get at these motives is to be credited to Freud. And when they began to find ways to get at them, more or less systematically, beyond the methods that were available, hypnosis, you can hypnotize a patient sometimes, find out motives that he has that he doesn't know he had. But this is cumbersome and clumsy and doesn't always work. And psychoanalysis was a new method for getting at these unconscious motives. Now, Freud discovered and improved that and developed that method. Now, when that method became possible, it could be applied, for example, to people with heart trouble, arthritis, stomach trouble, and so forth. I'll tell you what I hope for. I hope that the general feeling of man toward man will respond to the greater economic security that we have, and that people will treat each other a little more decently. I think the attitude of Christians toward Jews is still a blot on the reputation of Christianity. I think the way we treat Jews in this country is disgraceful. I think the way we treat foreign countries generally could stand some improvement. I would hope that we'd have some communication with Russia, for example, that isn't in the general tone of, well, what are those bums up to now? I mean, these are human beings with certain, according to us scientists, they're just like us. Now, the economists and the sociologists will say, well, they have little differences. They're still human beings whom I think we could establish contact with and understand, and substitute for this present-day fear some kind of understanding. We may not approve of everything they do anymore, and we approve of everything the Romanians do or the Italians, but we don't stand in a constant attitude of non-communication. And I'd say the same about the Chinese. I mean, the Red Chinese. I believe that communication methods will be improved. In a way, isn't it kind of pitiful? In the year 1959, we still have no international language. We still can't talk to most people unless we've, like you, learned 3 or 4 other languages. But there's really no way we can communicate without translations.
Doesn't all that you have just said add up to a hope for peace?
Oh, naturally, but I think we all have that, but I'm not sure we all have the same idea what peace is. Suppose we had better communications all around. We have pretty good communications in America, and yet we manage to maintain these frictional zones and these scrappings and bickerings and fightings and disagreeable things that I don't even need to list. So I don't know. Certainly we ought to get some way or other clear of all this incredible devastation that we call war. But the abolition of war, I don't think means that we're quite ready to have the lion lie down with the lamb. I think that the assumption of the aggressive and destructive impulses that each of us has to master, that concept of personality, makes us face realistically the fact that there are going to be a lot of smaller wars. And so we have to prepare for that, and then ultimately hope that in the process of universe evolution, those will be eliminated.
What do you foresee for the future as a result of developments in psychiatry?
I don't know, Denver. I'm no prophet. I keep thinking, what are we going to do around here next? We've got this children's building coming, and what must we develop around here next, and what areas of our work is not up to our ideals, and so forth. And I've got some writing in mind, but now to try to look 5 or 10 years ago, or even 20 years ahead, and say what psychiatry is going to be, it'll be something better, I'm sure of that, but I don't know what.
The National Broadcasting Company Television Network has presented a conversation with Dr. Karl Menninger and Denver Linley, editor of Viking Press. The program was filmed at the Menninger Foundation in Topeka, Kansas. This program was produced as a special project by the NBC Television Network.